Good afternoon. It's time for another step through the Bible on our walking tour through the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. We're chapter 18 and we're verse 16 through to the end of the chapter. Now, this episode, it's usually, if you look at your Bible, you'll find that my Bible says Abraham intercedes for Sodom. It's the conversation between Abraham and God over the fate of Sodom, which takes the form of a sort of Dutch auction. Will you spare Sodom if there are 100 men who are just? Oh, yes. 50 men? Oh, yes. 10 men? Well, yes. So Abraham intercedes for Sodom. Now, we've already met Sarah, who's got personality. We've met Abraham, who's got personality. Sarah's got bags of personality. Sarah's got possibly rather a difficult personality. And in this passage, we meet something very odd indeed. We find that God has got a personality as well. We're used to thinking of God as the supreme being, as him who reigns on high, who is all knowledge, all love, and all powerful. Here we get a God who's very much limited. First of all, he comes down because he wants to come down to investigate whether what he's heard about Sodom is actually true or not. So he doesn't have all knowledge. He needs to go on a fact-finding mission. And then the other thing is he wonders about whether he should discuss this with Abraham and so on and so forth. In other words, God doesn't seem to be perfectly aligned with his will, if you see what I mean. In other words, he has two minds. He's not indivisible. He has doubts. He acts like a human being. Now, this has often been pointed out by people that the vision of God in the book of Genesis is anthropomorphic. In other words, God is fashioned in human form. And of course, we've been told at the beginning of the book of Genesis, man is fashioned in the form of God. We're in the image and likeness of God, but we meet a God who's in the image and likeness of man. And this can be problematic, the fact that God has a personality. Also, you could say, some witty people have pointed out, not only has God got a personality, he's got a personality problem. Because why is God so bothered about the wickedness of Sodom? And why is it that God seems markedly less compassionate than Abraham? Why does Abraham want to save Sodom from God's anger, from destruction? And why does God seem so keen to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? It's not at all clear. I think this passage is, in its funny sort of way, an extended joke, in that the role of God and the role of Abraham, the role of God and the role of the human being, have been transposed. God is acting like a human being. Abraham is acting like God. And in fact, God says here, yet now the Lord had wondered, shall I conceal from Abraham what I'm going to do? As Abraham will become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on the earth will bless themselves by him. For I have singled him out to command his sons and his family after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is upright and just, so that the Lord can carry out for Abraham what he has promised him. So in other words, God speaks in very high terms of Abraham. That clearly, as I say, the passage hasn't had much smoothness. It's a bit of a bumpy passage. This clearly indicates it's come from various sources. Various things have been put into it. So what do we learn from this passage? Well, we learn from this passage that human beings will see God as one of their own. We learn from this passage that human beings will assume that God is rather like them, because it's hard for the human being to raise his or her mind to the level of God and to understand what God is like. Therefore, the authors, when they talk about God, tend to imagine somebody who's rather like themselves. The other thing is, Abraham is clearly a wonderful person. Abraham, after all, is the progenitor of the patriarch of the whole house of Israel. Therefore, he is an idealized figure. They don't have any difficulty in seeing Abraham as a truly great man. And his greatness is shown by the way he pleads for fallible human beings, in fact, quite wicked human beings, asking God to be compassionate to them. So the great virtue that Abraham has here is the virtue of compassion. And this is something we all need to cultivate. Now, we had this idea that's been in the Bible before, that God is a tribal God and he's just there for the tribe. Abraham is just there for his own progeny. He's there to found a great race and at the expense of other people. Not so. Just as he has reached out, as our American brethren say, to the three strangers who called his tent. So now he reaches out to those in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now it's true his nephew Lot lives in Sodom and Gomorrah or nearby, and he might be thinking of his nephew Lot, but he's also thinking of thousands of other people as well, the cities of the plain. So Abraham shows us that compassion does not have limits. Compassion is not something you keep just for your own family and your own tribe. Compassion is something to be extended to strangers, even people you don't meet ever, and people you have nothing in common with. Don't forget, Abraham is a nomad. These are the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, the settled people, who are farmers and are rather different in their lifestyle to the nomads, as we will see. So the story is the people who are not like you also have a claim on your charity. In fact, have a full claim on your charity. So let's love our neighbour. And our neighbour is everyone. All the best. Bye for now.